Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Hartley Hare. Yeah, pause for applause. No, not all at once. Thank you. Uh, oh, ignore him. He's always there when I wake up. I don't know what he's doing. Anyway, we're here at the Writers Guild of Great Britain event today to talk about a subject very dear to my heart. Yes, save UK children's television. After all, where would I be without it? I'd like to introduce you to our distinguished panel. I'd like to, but I'm going to introduce these people instead. Anyway, each of them are an award-winning, and feel free to give me an award anytime you like. Thank you. So, first, journalist, broadcaster, and political commentator Sangita Myska. Then, screenwriter, novelist, and children's laureate Frank Cottrell-Boyce. And screenwriter, playwright, and WGGB Chair Emma Reeves. And someone who I gave her start to on Pipkins many years ago, many years ago. But is she grateful? I think we all know the answer to that. Writer and WGGB Treasurer Gail Renard. I'll send you the invoice, Gail. Over to you, Gail.
Thank you very much. And I would like to introduce the producer, actor, and puppet master extraordinaire, Nigel Plaskitt. So thank you. Thank you, Nigel. And thank you, Hartley. Well, as we see, we're here for to discuss children's television. One of the most important subjects always revolves around children. And also we'll be talking about how it affects BBC Charter renewal and all that. But first, I always think everybody has a favorite series from when you were a child, the same way you have your favorite books when you were a child. And I'd like to start by asking the panel, what was your favorite television show? Sangita, would you like to start us off?
I'm happy to start you off, but please, Gail, do not make me choose. There's a lot of them. These are preschool programs primarily. Mr. Ben, Trumpton, Hartley Hare was by far one of my favourites. Bagpuss, I wouldn't miss an episode, and of course the Wombles. And I'm happy to talk about why they had such a profound effect on me as a child, and I think a lasting influence into adulthood.
Oh yes, please. I mean, do tell us why.
I was mentioning to you earlier that we came to the UK in the 1970s from East Africa. We were part of the East African Indian migration, and it was a very traumatic experience for my parents and for my older siblings, who were quite a lot older than I was, and had done, a lot of their childhood in a foreign country. And we moved from having, frankly, what is a very middle class and comfortable upbringing to Willesden Green, where initially the East End, and then settled. Our first place was a 2-bedroom flat in Willesden Green in the attic of a Polish Jewish emigre called Uncle Arlof. And all of my early memories centre very much around watching the television. And the reason was my parents were out working almost as soon as they arrived. And I suppose we would be described as what people now just call latchkey children. So in other words, my parents were out for most of the time, and my brother and sister, we would pick each other, they would pick me up from school in descending order, and then we would come home, and I would be parked in front of the television. And so the characters created by some of you here were more than just characters on a screen. They were my friends, they were my educators, they were the people that I spent time with in lieu of my parents, and they were the people that helped my brother, sister, and I really understand what it is to be in Britain, to have a shared sense of our identity, to understand everything from language to etiquette. And I genuinely believe that the programs that I watched when I was very little helped me become the very, very proud English and British person that I am today. I have an extremely clear sense of identity. And I do believe that part of that is having had this collection of programs that help me root myself in my immediate community and England and the UK as a whole.
Oh, thank you, Sangita. You just perfectly summed up the importance of children's television. And I'll add one quick thing before I ask Frank about his. I had a little similar situation in that I grew up in Montreal in Canada, which was French and English, and also a hostile place at times because of the differences. And it was watching French television from a very early age that helped to get me fluent in French a lot quicker because it was something you wanted to watch. But I learned watching Robin Hood, or because they used to show old shows, Robin Hood, or in French, Robin des Bois, that when I would see the same show in English and then see it dubbed in French, it wasn't a literal translation. Cultural differences would creep into translations of shows. And that's when I learned people have different ways of looking at things, but that's okay. I understand them both. Later on, I found out that Robin Hood was written by, it was the blacklisted writers from the McCarthy period, and they wrote it under assumed names. And in fact, the Sheriff of Nottingham was McCarthy, but that was much later in life. So it was an important series. But Frank, would you like to tell us about your favourites?
Big crossover with Sangita, but I'm going to punch up Oliver Postgate and Peter Firmin as key influences. I just think they were two absolutely amazing artists, and some of the things that I think are worth bearing in mind is what a cottage industry that was, how punk rock it was. They made their own stuff and then they sold it to the broadcaster and got a fair fee for it, which is very important. The simplicity of it, how innovative. I feel very, very blessed to have grown up in a period where I was exposed to many, many different types of animation. So if you think of Poggleswood, they had these stop motion puppets in a real woodland, which is just breathtaking. Whereas, Noggin was terribly simple, these cutouts. Clangers were literally knitted, and all these amazingly different approaches to telling a story. And I do think that that's something we've lost, that nearly all animation, even the stuff that everyone loves, Bluey or whatever, has a similar kind of weightless, marshmallowy look and looks highly technological. It's not something that invites you to have a go yourself. And it doesn't have that kind of human voice, so one of the key things about Firmin and Postgate is Oliver's voice, which still resonates in my mind. Listen and I will tell you more of the saga. Listen and I will tell you more of the saga of Knock in the Knock. Amazing. That amazing voice. So I would pick out those two as a composite, truly great artist. All their stuff was about utopia. They were all different model communities, small communities, whether it's the Clangers on their planet, that weird collection of people in Backbus's shop, the Pogles in the wood, whatever it was, and above, for me, like Abbey the Engine, that small Welsh town, that they're all about the possibility of community and the importance of community, how sustaining community is. There's only one baddie in the whole thing, which is Nogbad the Bad Boy. He was doomed by nominative determinism from the beginning. Like, what were his parents thinking? So just the sort of joy of that and the kind of expanse of it and the duration of it, they did it time and time again over years, and that bespeaks a system of commissioning and funding that allows someone to experiment, to grow, to be bold, and to create something for posterity. And I think if we get to talking about practical things, which I really hope we do, then talking about why it was possible for those two people to create that great art and why that's much harder now, it is the key conversation for me, I think.
Oh, thank you, Frank. And we'll definitely, toward the end of the meeting, we're going to ask for takeaways, because we're hoping this is going to become a WGGB campaign about saving children's television for the UK. And we're going to ask you all for concrete asks. So keep that in mind. And like I said, we will come back to it, Frank. But thanks. Can I ask Nigel Plaskitt, First of all, what were your favorite shows? And I know that you're going to answer some of the things Frank said. I've worked with Nigel so long, we know each other too well, but go for it.
Well, as a child, my
Yeah.
favorite television programs were very different, apart from the fact we didn't have television, because
Oh,
until I was 11 years old, we had no TV. So it was the radio. And there was Children's Hour on the radio. But I had watched, we had Andy Pandy, we had the Wooden Tops, lots of kind of made for children stuff, all by the BBC, because for a chunk of it, only the BBC existed. And but when I was growing up, then we came into the things like Jerry Anderson's stuff, Thunderbirds, and all of those things. So that was in kind of my teen years, and I wasn't really watching TV after that. But then I was making it. So I was in '72. We started making Pipkins, and it was exactly around the time Sangita was talking about earlier. And we were given the brief it came about because of Sesame Street happening in the US. That had been going for some years, and the IBA wanted to create something for children. We didn't have much TV, daytime TV at the beginning. When we were commissioned, there was some children's programming going on around the middle of the day, which was exactly when we were, but there was I think possibly a program, sort of a chat program as well, but very little actual daytime TV existed, and it was just beginning. And we were commissioned as a series to attract adults to watch with children, so that they would start them talking about the subjects we were talking about. And we know this happened from the response that we got, and myself now from talking to people like Sangita who experienced it and remembered it. But we were also told there were many children growing up in tower blocks, for example, who never saw the outside world. And we were to stimulate their imaginations regarding this. So there were lots of reasons, and the reasoning behind it was really to educate, but in a gentle way, not teaching ABC or 1, 2, 3, but teaching them about life, really. And that was our reason for being. And there was a requirement by the IBA for the companies, the ITV companies, to create children's programming. And I think that still went on till relatively recently, within the last 10, 15 years. I don't know exactly when it stopped. But clearly that's gone now. So I think that's a great shame that they don't create programs. I know the platforms are changing, but I think there still has to be someone producing this stuff. So that's really kind of where I stand on all those programs, those early programs. All of the programs I mentioned were kind of favorites of mine. So, and I ended up working for one of them too later on. So.
Cheers, Nigel, and which we can come back to later. But with Frank speaking about when things were a cottage industry, you and I got back to that doing Monty and Co, which
Yeah.
we made a series in the past couple of years, which was total cottage industry and joy, and it can be done. But we'll talk about that a bit later. But Emma, tell us about your favorites.
Well, I mean, as we all know, children's TV, young people's TV, young adults TV is a very broad church. There's a lot of different things. I think some of my favorite. Obviously, I'm mostly a scripted drama writer, so obviously I instinctively go to those. But also, I think of the sort of other sorts of shows. Like I think before I was talking about Play School, Play Away, Crackerjack, and particularly the live shows that used to go out, the magazine shows on a Saturday morning. Like for my child, it was Multicolored Swap Shop, then it was going live, then Live and Kicking, and all. There was a long tradition of that, and there was something which was quite special because it was live and it was happening now, and it was all over the UK. You know that people were, would be tuning in from all over the UK, and we're watching it right now, and then it was, and there were all sorts of things you could like there'd be cartoons and like different sorts of music, and so I think that live experience was something very special, which I loved. also remember when I was I remember being on holiday with my sisters in a caravan, and like I was making up stories for them because we didn't have a TV there, but I was making up stories for them about the adventures of our favorite TV characters. So it does stimulate the imagination. But I think I've got to give a mention for Doctor Who, because obviously that was originally made by the children's department, grew out of that, and I think it's a wonderful example of what can happen when we don't sort of fence off children's shows over there and say they're just for children. I think they're, and I think particularly with Doctor Who, there's a huge community of autistic and neurodivergent fans, and I think sort of quite often people find a joy in a program that's sort of made for young people but can also be for adults. So I think we need to try and make more family series that everyone can enjoy.
Thank you, Emma. I mean, I had a look at what is on our channels now and streamers, because of course, there's CBBS and CBBC, the two channels for the preschool and older children from the BBC. There is there's ITVX for children, and what I did find, ITVX has started to show Captain Pugwash, which is really lovely and all that. It was made in the 1970s, but they had commercials first, and the commercials were for a lottery that you could buy a ticket to win a £1.2 million home, which I'm sure the parents will be thrilled if the kiddie gets it. And there was the other advert was for coffee and for Lorraine. Now you can pay for an ITVX version without commercials, but again, where is the free television for children's? And I was just going to add, from the streamers, and we're talking mainly live action, there's a lot on Disney UK. I haven't seen any British made shows. There are very few elsewhere. There are a lot of, there are a lot of American-made live shows, a lot of Canadian. Netflix has, so far that I could see, acquisitions, which is buying older series like Hey Dougie and Shaun the Sheepdog and Peppa Pig and other things. But where are the new shows coming from? And the thing that I'd like to open up is about co-pros, because there are some co-pros being done for children. But they all end up sounding transatlantic and not British. But I mean, what are your experiences from the panel? Anybody? Can you think of different ones? Because they all have. I mean, even things like, I think, Sex Education, which is for older children and teenagers, and Heartstopper. Emma, weren't you saying about it feels more American?
Yes, they're both sort of, they're described as British shows, filmed in Britain, but I look at them and I don't recognise those schools, and particularly Sex Education is filmed in North Wales, where I'm from. So I can see it's really weird to me, because that's literally, I know that place, and yet everyone's behaving as if they're an American high school, and it's sort of, and I know that was the author's intention, but I sort of feel that, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we'd done something like Sex Education that actually could speak to what life is actually like in Britain and how people behave like British people. And as I'm sure Sangita knows, it, like when I say that, I'm not using it in any sort of like reform type way. It's sort of, what we try to do in CBBC at its best is to reflect the experience of everyone in Britain and all the different sorts of communities. When we used to write stories about refugees and all sorts of things. So I think it's just, and I've worked on co-pros, and there is, obviously the more companies putting in money, the more notes. The BBC only puts in a fraction of the money now, but still wants to get all its notes worth that it possibly can. And then all the other companies want the same. But it ends up things being blanded out and dumbed down. And also, we have to take certain content out because, for instance, on a show I worked on, even after filming, some very, very mild references to gay characters were taken out because they wanted to sell it to countries where that might be offensive. So, co-pros co-pros present as many problems as they do solutions.
Sangita, yeah.
I have to say, I mean, what you're saying breaks my heart. And it breaks my heart because I was state educated. I went to local schools. The schools I went to were from sort of very diverse, planted in very diverse socioeconomic housing. And Grange Hill is a very good example of a show which reached me just at the point that I was entering high school, and I was finding it absolutely terrifying and confusing, because jumping from primary school to a large comprehensive secondary school is confusing and terrifying for some children. And because of the area in which my schools were situated and where we lived, we had a range of social challenges. Right, everything from integrating as minority groups, to drugs, which were an issue, to bullying because of our weight. And what Grange Hill was able to do was capture some of the day-to-day drama within a school and the tension between children, and also the attitudes towards authority. And I mean, I wasn't privately educated, but what I would say is that one's experience of being in a state school and your relationship with authority is very different to the children that I've met who have gone to independent schools. And that's not a value judgment, it's just my personal experience. So to be able to have Grange Hill as a touch point for us, as a means by which we could understand our world better through the script lines, you know, the drugs storyline, which really took off. And I remember our high school headmaster having a bit of a tough time trying to understand quite how he should negotiate it, because we were all talking about it. But you know, it was so relevant to us. And I think it opened up this conversation within schools where, you know, perhaps teachers were able to say, well, we can't just ignore that this is happening, because there are children within the school that will have contact with drugs, but actually rather use this as a way in which perhaps we can discuss more freely what the impact of drug use is, and how one deals with a friend, for example, or ourselves if we find ourselves in a tricky spot. So it's incredible. God, it really breaks my heart to hear that very gritty British experience is being eradicated from the language of children's television. And I think ultimately that's detrimental for young people.
Yes, I really agree. And you know, it's been a concern for some time. I think ever since they took well, even before, I think, you know, even when I started working in children's TV in the 2000s, we weren't able to do Grange Hill type shows anymore. And I think, yeah, we've lost something very valuable. But sorry, I'll let the others speak.
Well, I was just going to say, I can read out a question that we got from our viewers, from members. Do the panel feel, no, that's the wrong one, sorry. In the past, the BBC has had a long tradition of realistic children's dramas, i.e. Tracy Beaker, which I believe Emma wrote on, Kids from 47A, which I did, so thank you for that. Is there still a place for that in today's market? Now, there's the problem, because the word market is different from should it be on television. Frank, have you got any thoughts on this one?
I don't think we should. I mean, like, there are really good and we were talking about live action dramas, aren't we? And first of all, my own view about how you make those things is the more specific you are, going back to a kind of postgate note, the more place specific you are, the more universal your story is. That idea of like trying to say it in Nowheresville, hoping that there's some kind of lowest common denominator in a kind of Airbnb aesthetic, you know, of everything a little bit grey and tasteful and nothing. That just doesn't work. You know, we love to know places, and so that I think that you're on a kind of Hidington holiday with that. There are, you know, we still do make really good live action stuff. Dexter Proctor, Junior Doctor is very funny. I think it's really good. It's got really great people in it. Elle McNichol series, A Certain Spark, was really great, and very, very place specific. So we shouldn't be too despairing about this. I think it's the fact is though that we've allowed a situation to develop in which children's TV doesn't get the cultural traction that it used to, because it's been pushed to one side. Exactly what you were talking about before, that they chase this idea that there'll be a sort of specialist thing, and also that children are a specialist group. Like children were the same as, you know, fly fishermen or recreational taxidermists. No, children are the future of the country, and actually, you know, harsh to say, they shouldn't really be watching that much telly on their own. It should be shared, and therefore we should have an obligation to make TV that is worth watching across the age group. You know, but again, like, I can come back to that. How are these things commissioned? Where are they placed in the schedule? These are the answers. It's like, it's not about the creative people behind it. We've still got really brilliant creative people working, but they're working thanklessly. They're working without the funding and without the backing, and without the notice that you had when you know, back in the day when you. So you see, like, just for one instance, one example, there was a time when Ghosts would have sat on children's TV somewhere that allowed it an adult audience, wouldn't it? I mean, that's just it grew out of children's TV, you know, grew out of Horrible Histories. It's this mega hit now that everyone's waiting for, but none of that mega hitness is really feeding back into children's. I just find that's as much a statement about what we think of children as it is about broadcasting.
No, I totally agree. And the problem also with a lot of the co-productions is, I think what Emma was touching on, that you can get 13 different sets of notes from 13 different sources, and you cannot square a circle. And that road lies madness. And it just keeps diluting, and nobody's going to be happy. It's no way to do telly. But I mean, Nigel, were you going to say something?
Well, only that we in recent years, 10 years ago, we tried to reboot Pipkins with ITV, and we explored the possibility for about a year. We came to the conclusion that they didn't have the rights. They had the rights to the programs we've recorded, but they didn't know if they had the rights to the show. So we decided to create something else ourselves, and we went along many avenues trying to recreate it. In the end, we did produce it, and it was created as a kind of cooperative with the people who made the show and a number of financial investors. And eventually the BBC acquired it, and it went on the air about 6 years ago, and it was on the iPlayer as well, and attracted quite a lot of followers. Having said that, I think it's very interesting that Frank was talking about creating stuff across the spectrum. It's quite difficult to do when you've got, you know, from preschool through to 16 or 17. But as I said before, we were trying to do exactly that, is try to get young preschool children to sit down with their parents and watch these shows. And that's what we kind of did then. And we knew that we had an adult audience watching, because we would get letters from students who used to come home and watch the show on their own when they were on holidays or whatever. So we knew we were attracting an audience of adults as well as the young children who watched it. And I think that was important to us. It was certainly what we set out to do. And we know we stimulated conversations between adults and their children. Because we got letters about that too, particularly an episode where we talked about death. In the second series, we had the lead actor in the show, which was called Inigo Pipkin at the time, was George Woodbridge, who was quite an elderly actor, and sadly he died in the middle of the second series. And we decided that in series 3 we would open it by saying that he had died. And there was a program, an episode that we discussed his death and what happened, and etc., etc. And we had 2 letters. I think we had more than that, but 2 that I'm going to cite. One from a woman who was very appreciative and said it got her had an interesting conversation with her child about death and what happens. And another from a woman who said her daughter was very distraught about it because her grandfather had died recently. But we suspected that it was probably the mother that was a bit more distraught than the child, because children don't have concepts of death at that age. It's very rare for you to find someone, for a young child to understand that. But we were trying to introduce social issues, and there were many across the 9 years that we made the show. It was very interesting from looking at content, and it's really good that the Writers Guild are getting behind this, because let's face it, it all starts with content. You don't have a series if you don't have the content, and that's very important to me, is to have the ideas behind it. So yeah, that's it really.
Cheers, Nigel. I was going to say, when we did the death episode, that young children have a concept of death in that the person isn't there anymore. And you can explain someone we love isn't there anymore. And it's very, very sad. Because also we dealt with emotions in anything that we've done, whether it was Pipkins or more recently Monty and Co. Emotions are important, because children have to know emotions are okay, and you're going to feel these things, and also this is how you can deal with it. But
and relationships too, yes. I think is important.
Yes.
What we were producing, and what we did in both cases, in both of those instances, were producing mini dramas for children. They were pieces of drama, and there was nothing like it at the time. And I don't know that there's been that much for preschool since. I don't know.
No, but also we made it very, very funny.
Yeah.
We packed a lot in, but I was going to say to anybody who ever writes in a children's show about death, my one tip is always, you can't leave a child distraught a child who's watching distraught about death. You have to bring them back into the sunshine afterwards and show them a way forward, so that you're not leaving them just with existential, grief or whatever. But I was going to say, we have another question here about, okay, now that the government has announced plans to ban social media access for under 16s, how will this impact on children's TV? Will we see a movement toward vertical storytelling, so that children are better provided with a range of accessible news and entertainment? Will the likes of iPlayer and ITVX have to evolve to accommodate children and young people better? There's a lot to unpack there. Anybody want to tackle this one? Frank, please.
Well, first of all, I think YouTube Kids is going to be excluded, isn't it? So that's a big issue. And the thing about YouTube Kids is that I think this I keep trying to pull this back to money and how things happen. But one of the problems that we have is that whoever's making programs, whoever's commissioning them, they're being watched on YouTube, and therefore nothing goes back into the pot. And historically, that's how this has been possible. You do a nice little series, that's your idea, it works, you might get series 2, and off the back of series 2, it suddenly becomes feasible because you can sell a bit of merch, you can do some repeats, and it's the repeats and merch that make it financially viable. So YouTube is this huge kind of scavenger that gobbles up everything. And I think perhaps the good thing about the ban is that this is the first time that we've talked about the digital world as though it is in any way controllable. It grew out of Silicon Valley with this huge libertarian ideology behind it, which is an ideology which pretended that this was just like weather and we're all controlling it. And actually, over the last years, it's become very obvious that far from us all controlling it, a very small number of people controlling it, a very small number of largely damaged people are controlling it, and that therefore we have a right to bite back. And I think whatever the flaws, shortcomings of the ban, that's a huge kind of philosophical breach there. And we should now, in this moment, start asking for something in return. So there should be a levy, there should be way of making sure that kids can find good quality programming, so that, you know, in each country that you can find programming from and for that country, however you want to make it. And parents should be much more aware of how to game the algorithm. I mean, if you want your kids to watch good TV, just sit up for half an hour at night and keep clicking on what you think is good TV, so that that's what gets recommended to them. We need to kind of educate ourselves about that we've got to learn to live with this and to make it our servant instead of the other way around. I feel really strongly about this, because I think the only analogy I've got is for 19th century mills. When our kids are scrolling, they're working. They're working. You know, when you were playing Pokemon Go, you were also helping train delivery drones. When you're clicking on, you know, which pictures have a motorbike in, you are helping train driverless cars. You are working all the time. You're doing that. Our kids are working just like 19th century kids in steam-powered cotton mills. They're working. They deserve something back. And I think this is the moment that we could start saying, you know what, enough's enough. You know, the technology is great, but, you know, it's not. We're not components.
That is brilliant, and it's going straight into our list of asks right on top, because yes, they should be putting something back into the system, the YouTubes and the social medias, and they're not. It devours a lot of material, but we need something back. But I mean, shall we? What other asks do we have for the BBC for the charter renewal? Emma, was that you?
I don't know if it's sort of, well, I'm sort of taking something from the chat and going, could there be a refined version of that for charter renewal, which is the suggestion of having a specific commissioner at the BFI, a specific commissioner for children's content, because I think, I mean, we do have them, but I'm you know, saying of the 20 years that I've been working at was working at CBBC, I just saw the importance of children's being, I felt that we were being sort of pushed further and further away from the mainstream, and that we just simply weren't recognised by the BBC in general. I think sort of obviously in the bit, you know, everything is made up of individuals, and I'm not here to bash the BBC. It's just this is who I happen to have worked for a lot, and there are obviously individuals out to make their name and make their career, and quite frankly, they've therefore got no interest in making children's content because they don't think it's important. So
Yeah.
so I think an ask of there being a senior person at the BBC with responsibility for getting children's content mainstream, and because what I was saying before about the experience of watching something together, the experience of being able to talk about it and just dissect it and share the experience, watching it with adults, watching it with other kids is important, rather than just being stuck on your own little algorithm. And I think, you know, we just need it to be taken seriously, and I think asking for somebody to be appointed in that role might be a good start.
Is it retrograde to be asking for a children's television presence on the linear channel?
No, I think we absolutely should be, and we shouldn't have let it go so easily. I mean, I think, and again, sorry, the BBC again, but you know, ITV dropped most of its linear programming of children's, and I think I have heard that was partly to do with advertising ban of junk food having an unfortunate effect. But and then the BBC followed suit because they wanted to put shows about people flogging their possessions and buying houses in the country, and game shows. They wanted to put those on because they got more viewers. And it's sort of, you know, if we're having a public service broadcaster, just because something gets higher viewers doesn't mean that it should be promoted at the expense of these incredibly important programs for young people, which, as we keep saying, just, you know, define, you know, we remember these things all our lives. You know, how many episodes of Escape to the Country will you sort of be thinking about on your deathbed?
100%. And, you know, like you talked before about, well, Sangita talked before as well about, you know, creating a national identity. Jesus, do we need one? You know, if we've discovered anything, we've discovered that in the absence of a narrative, a proper narrative, people will gravitate towards any narrative, no matter how mean, malicious, mendacious it is. And part of the BBC's brief should surely be helping us forge a picture of who we are.
Well, actually, since
which
you
is,
mentioned
which
that,
is where Sangita came in.
well, yeah, I mean, I think there is undoubtedly a political aspect, I would say this, but there is undoubtedly a political aspect to everything that we're talking about. And that political aspect, as far as I'm concerned, is what the role children's programming has in, particularly, as you say now, particularly, I think, in forging a shared identity, which will bring the country together at a time that we are seeing populist parties doing everything they can to exploit division. And before this, I'm sorry to repeat myself, this is really because we had this conversation prior to the recording of it, but speaking from both a sort of personal perspective and the perspective of somebody who's very interested in politics and the current discourse, and extremely worried about the way in which the UK is breaking up into its different nations and regions, but in terms of its identity, but also within England, particularly the sense that minorities are becoming ever more divided. So I think I was outlining earlier how when we arrived in the country, actually being able to have touchpoint programs, whether it's Ivor the engine telling us a bit about what it's like to be a railway engine in Wales. This is the first time that I have, as a little kid living in a very urban part of London, get to hear that children, that the Welsh identity is connected to this mythical idea of a dragon, and this dragon happens to live in, the engine of the steam train. This might sound small, but it's not, because it's a moment where my very small brain can connect that actually there are people that live in another part of the country, and they have different ideas, and they have mythical creatures. I think about, we were talking about the Wombles earlier, and I was saying that I do think that part of the problem with social cohesion now is that we seem to have, we don't have friction-free borders between communities. Those borders between communities, as they grow larger, seem to be creating friction, and it's difficult sometimes to identify what that is outside the deliberate ploys by certain political parties. And some of that, I think, is around understanding what our shared values are, and this can be everything from queuing in a line to picking up litter, which is why I was saying earlier the Wombles was such a crucial thing for me, because to this day I see picking up litter, taking your things, once you've used something, you put it in a bag and you dispose of it correctly. And it was so ahead of its game, wasn't it, in terms of recycling? And the reason I think this is so important, and I get unbelievably militant about it, is because the Wombles to me were my friends. They had a very clear message around the values of having a clean environment and looking after each other and our communities. And that is something I've carried through until adulthood. And then on top of that, you've got, as I was saying earlier, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but packing around these programs, public service information. Charlie Says, brilliant series. Communicated everything from how you don't get run over to how not to have antisocial habits. So given charter renewal, actually there is a whole section in there around diversity, social cohesion, reflecting the nations and regions. Talking of which, the Wombles, first time I saw somebody with tartan, or a character, a Womble wearing tartan, right? Tobermory. Every time I go to Tobermory, it's a moment where I think back about where I first had that experience of what Scotland is, or that there are people living in another part of the country that might sound or dress differently to me. So actually, if I were in your position, I would think about making a very clear, explicit, and unapologetic argument about how you as creators can build a social message that can be shared and sent out across generations that will bind our country together at a point where it feels more divided than ever. And I genuinely think this would be incredibly powerful. And I'm not having a go at the BBC either. I worked there for many years. But in the end, it's still the biggest commissioner of children's programming. And this is embedded inside its charter. And it's not doing a good enough job, in my opinion, of fulfilling those values.
Like in a kind of, sorry, in a more kind of fundamental sense as well, I kind of think that the idea of a scheduled, so one of the problems that, you know, with children's anxiety and all that stuff going on is that we talk about endless scrolling, frictionless entertainment, rhythm, timing are really important things that we're kind of erasing from the mentality. And that, you know, when I turned on Children's Hour as a child, it was like, here's an hour, that's about a good length of time, not like go and sit in front of Coco Melon for 6 hours. You know, that's a very different, that's not entertainment, that's sedation. And well, you know, I think that is an important point, but also in that hour, what I was learning is your country sees you, your country's beautiful, and your country has ideas about what you could do to contribute to your country. And if you tune into TV, BBC, ITV at this hour of the day now, what it says is your country is ruled by very old people who are trying to gouge more money out of the stuff that the much more worthy forefathers left in the attic, or by playing the Ponzi scheme of the UK property market. You know, it's full of parasites who don't give a shit about you. And that's what that hour of TV is saying at the moment. And that's the hour of TV that used to say, here's Blue Peter, why don't you build rockets? No. You know, why don't you invent a hovercraft? You could do this. You know, why don't you write into Biddy Baxter and she'll tell you how to become a consultant neurologist? You know, that's what was going on before. And it's like a death cult now.
May I just add something into that? It's sorry, a bit of a sidebar, but kind of connected to what you're saying, is obviously when I was watching children's television, there were often adults communicating ideas to us.
Yes.
So John Noakes was a grown-up. I mean, not a very old grown-up, but he was a grown-up. And he was kind of quite a cool grown-up from my childhood standpoint. And actually, adults who take you through the world, whenever I flick through the channels, seeing an adult taking a child through the world is not something you see very often now. The average age of presenter seems to have dropped considerably. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but what I'm suggesting is that it's not necessarily a binary choice. And what part of the kind of fracturing of our society here in the UK is also around age, where very often people aren't living in extended family groups anymore. You aren't necessarily going to see somebody much older than your parents or your caregivers within your immediate network. And there is something incredibly important and beautiful, I think, about children understanding that people who are grown-ups are also their friends and also have information to give them. And if you look back at Play School, for example, which was a very important program for me because it had Floella Benjamin, had Derek, you know, I knew that we came from another country, and suddenly there were also people on the TV who looked a bit different too. I mean, the first time I was called the P word was when I was in nursery school. So these aren't conversations that we could shy away from as a family. So it was very important to me to be able to see, you know, to feel comforted when I looked at grown-ups who were on my side or looked a bit like me, or adults who were all working together where there wasn't division. And I think, I don't know what I'm really trying to say. I think I'm trying to say there's been an erasure of anyone over the age of about 16 in children's television. And I think that's a really odd thing at the time that we know that multi-generational families are rapidly declining, not least because of the cost of housing. Sorry.
No, I always get anxious that this sort of seems sometimes to default in tone to nostalgia. And I just would like to pick up Emma's point earlier. This is not nostalgia. That idea of kids bracketed into separate micro channels, that's the old-fashioned idea. That's the one that's gone. You know,
yeah.
The space now on linear TV, that idea, that's an old idea. It's a busted flush. We can rethink linear TV and scheduling. I think scheduling is so important.
And also, I think about the BBC Charter renewal, it's what to keep, what we have to make sure that's kept from the old charter, because in the old charter, they do have the obligation for children's programming, and also, which I often quote back at the BBC negotiations, which they hate, but the BBC exists to make programs that anybody else isn't. It's not about commerciality.
Yeah.
It has to be, and it doesn't have to be the favorite program of everyone, as long as it's a favorite program of some. And I think children's more than fits that. So I think that is, look, it's so important for the BBC Charter renewal. But there were two people raised a point that I'd just like to cover here. That should the BFI Young Audiences Content Fund be reinstated? And someone said, yes, but perhaps change the requirements, i.e. loosen up the cultural test, and allow projects to be digital first rather than have a broadcaster attached. But I think the important thing about the Young Children's Fund, the Young Audiences Content Fund, for those who didn't know it, it was the BFI. You could apply for money for development for a children's series, or there was a second application that you could get money toward production. And that's so important because there's very little development money around that isn't tied also to necessarily to a broadcaster. And I think that's something else that the WGGB has been pushing for the return. We need funding and sources for children's television to grow, and to grow without, you don't need massive co-pros to make a children's show. Not everything is Star Wars or whatever. And it was back to when Nigel and I and our partners produced Monty & Co. Within the past couple of years. We made it, cottage industry, for about 1/3 of what the BBC would have paid. And we did it, and it looks brilliant. And we also, just as an added thing, we did say, our running joke while we were making it is, this is not a BBC series, so who was the first broadcaster to acquire it? The BBC. But we were glad they did. But as we're getting nearer to a close, any other takeaways that we can use for a campaign? And I will be coming back to all of you, if you don't mind, because hopefully the Guild will be doing a campaign, because this is too important not to. But any other comments, or?
Can I go first, because I've got
Yes.
to dash off?
Oh, of course.
I've just put in the chat about Sangita's lovely point about guiding adults, trustworthy adults. I've got to go and collect a grandchild. But I think this is a moment. The ban is a moment. It's a kind of existential change about our relationship with the digital, and this is the time to be courageous and make the big ask. They're ours. They specifically owe our children. We're going to lose a generation, and so this is the moment to be asked to be courageous. They need your content. You're working for them all the time. They need your content. This is the time to ask for some kind of proper recognition, a quid pro quo in terms of what findability on YouTube for your content, and pay something back. Right. And also the BBC should be brave and go and have some scheduling. Right.
Right. That is brilliant. Thank you so very, very much.
God bless. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye. Sangita, have you anything you want to add?
It's just an idea that's come to me now. I don't know if any of you were watching Andy Burnham, our soon-to-be Prime Minister's speech this morning, and he was talking, wasn't he, about creating a number 10 in the north of England that would be a nerve centre for development. Well, therein lies an opportunity, does it not? So if you were to start thinking, you're much greater minds than mine, but if you were to be able to use that idea to your advantage, which is actually, number one, not all children's creators are based in the southeast of England. Many of them will be based outside the southeast of England. But actually, as we look to an age where he says we're about to start reindustrializing, well, actually, part of that reindustrializing could in fact be becoming the content creators of the future for children and young people. And given broadly what he appeared to be talking about was creating regional development programs for industry, actually this could be the moment to strike, and to say, listen, we are make all the arguments around content cost and creation. It's obviously much more expensive to have creators based in London than it would be perhaps in other parts in other regions of England or the UK. And I just wonder whether there is some kind of symbiosis by which you could essentially exploit the current political climate. And just a final thing, you know, the reason I was thinking about Paddington Bear earlier and what an important character he was in my childhood, for a number of reasons, but not least because he was the outsider that came in and was and entered this familial atmosphere and learned about specifically Englishness in this case. But actually, you know, we as a country have rallied around this character in the light of deep sort of communal division, and I do think there's something in that shared the creation of the identification of shared values and the part that children's programming has to play in that long into the future, I hope. And I do think that there is a political argument to be made for extra funding within that context. And I think it could be a very powerful argument. And Gail, I'd be very happy to help you do that.
Okay, I have witnesses. Thank you. I was going to say, just as two quickies, that the creative industries are the UK's second biggest industry, bringing in over 124 billion a year. It could be much bigger. And Andy Burnham was our former culture secretary and our former shadow culture secretary, and we used to meet with him with the WGGB. So I think it's time to go, hi, remember us? And we will do. And I was going to say, Nigel, have you anything you want to add about where we go from here?
I can't add anything to what's been said, really. I mean, just it's so important that we do keep making children's programming that is local, that is for us. I think, you know, when we were making those programs all those years ago, we did have regional accents in the program, which was a first, I think, probably on ITV. And we centered it in Birmingham, or was supposed to be Birmingham. We didn't make it there, sadly, but well, happily actually. But it's so important that we keep children's programming going and it doesn't get lost or just laid into a series of endless cartoons that are not specific to this country. So yeah, please, I wish you luck with your campaign.
Oh, you'll be part of it. And Emma,
happy
yeah,
to.
two hopefully quick things for me. I wanted to pick on what Sangita was saying about the North, because obviously when I started working in children's, it was based out of White City. Then they moved it to Salford, and I'm afraid it felt a bit that, you know, having watched with dismay the gradual decline over the years, it felt a bit that it was out of sight, out of mind in Salford. But if power can be redistributed to the north, then children's being in Salford could be a strong position to on which to build a comeback. And I think I saw somebody said in the chat, it feels like fighting a losing battle, and yes, indeed it does. And I think this sort of defeatism is what I've sort of heard from my sort of bosses over the last sort of decade or so. I do feel they've given up, and I think a bit of the mentality you have to have is that if you build it, they will come thing. I was thinking, for instance, The Traitors. A lot of kids are watching The Traitors with their families. If they can find something and schedule it and publicize it so that families do watch together, they will. I mean, obviously it's 20 years ago now, but when Russell T Davies brought back Doctor Who and put it on a Saturday evening, they said no one will ever watch things on a Saturday evening. That slot is dead. It wasn't. He reinvigorated it. Now it's dead again. But I think the thing is, things go in cycles rather than being gone forever. So I think, and as somebody else said in the chat, I would like to see more new things rather than too much reliance on old IP. Absolutely. And I think just courage is needed from us as creatives, but of course courage is needed from the people in control. And if they're not going to be brave, maybe maybe we need to try and find some legislative stick to beat them with to get them braver.
Cheers. And also, can I say, which an important takeaway for me is also, let creators create and let writers write, because the companies are so intent on owning IP that they will, I mean, there's a lot of back of an envelope IP that is handed to a writer and they go, make a series out of this, but we own it. They will take, I mean, look, some very good books are being made for film and telly, but too often they'll buy just any series of books for the title, hand it, and it's, you know, the series will have no bearing on the books, but the company owns the IP. So, oops. Thank you. Someone has just said how important this meeting has been. And we're going to have to sadly draw to a close on this one. But like I said, we will be discussing campaign. We'll get back to all of you. And we can always do this again. But I cannot thank all our panelists enough. Frank Cottrell-Boyce, who's left us, he's gone up to pick his grandchild up. He hasn't left us in that sense. Also to Sangita Myska, to Nigel Plaskitt, to Emma Reeves. And we have a goodbye from one other person, don't we, Nigel?
Yeah, goodbye. Goodbye.
Oh, is that all you're going to do?
For this money, what more do you want?